Hello, everybody. Thanks for tuning in to this conversation with John and Vervaeke today. I'll set some context for that in a moment, but first some housekeeping. We have just opened registration for the first online Art of Circling course. Links for that below. It's a year-long training in the art of facilitating circling. If you want to know what more about circling, you could both look at the links below. And I also just released a video, the last video before this, of me doing a demo circle with an art of circling group. So you can get a chance in that video to see this, the kind of the set and setting and what it's like and what circling is. And so it's rare in that circling is very difficult to capture through video in my experience, but this one really does a good job and it gets to the profundity of it. So go ahead and check that out. And also, if you're interested in one-on-one coaching with me, go ahead and email me. The email's below. All right. This is my ongoing dialogue with my friend, John Vervaeke. John is a cognitive scientist and philosopher and professor at the University of Toronto. We've been talking, we met about 8 months ago or so, and through the interactions with John and our relationship and all the relationships that have spurred and interwoven with those, a lot of the conversations I've had you've seen a lot of them, has spurred and birthed something that the ancient art of dialogos, and it's been revealing itself to us in so many ways. It's something that's always been present for me personally. However, I'm seeing it more, and we're inventing and discovering and shaping it with more and more articulation of language that reveals it. So you can really feel the sense. I really felt my friendship with John and our collaboration in this on so many levels. So enjoy. Thank you. Record. Hey, John.
It's so good to see you.
It's good to see you too.
It's so good to see you, man. Really, yeah. So good to see you. So good to see you.
I'm enjoying your aliveness, right? I can feel your inspiration about in, like I can feel what you're facing, right? Like what you're looking at and how they're talking to you, because it seems like it's calling you almost out of your.
Yeah. Well, like we were talking about just before we hit record, yeah. There's so much happening right now, and there's just so much. There's so much I'm being exposed to and learning about that has so much real promise in it, and for the work we're doing together, and for the kind of like I was thinking about it the other day, because I get some people who criticize me, you need to be more political and blah blah. And I was thinking the other day, I'm not after the French Revolution or the American Revolution or the Russian Revolution. I'm after something like the Axial Revolution. That's what I'm after. Right? That's what kind of revolutionary I am.
Yes.
Right. And so I'm actually seeing, like we were talking, we can get into it a little bit later.
Yeah.
The Discord server networks and some of a lot of the other people. Like there's this converging thing happening. I'm just seeing a lot of that. Especially in this time of Kairos, right? I'm just seeing so much potential. I'm so excited. It's a weird place, Guy, because I've been telling people this, and I still don't know what the proper affect for what I'm going to say is, and I keep trying it on, and nothing feels quite right. But the COVID crisis has really increased the relevancy of my work. That's what people are telling me, right?
Yeah.
And Chris and Andrew and I have been talking about how it's done these two things that you need both of these for a kairos, right? For a lot of people, it's really exacerbated domicide. It's really accelerated a lot of the features of the mini crisis. But for other people, it's shifted their attention into the being mode, right? And then there's two things there that are happening. One, it came out with the discussion with Johannes. He was sort of prescient about this, that people are thrown back under the subjectivity only to find how shallow It is in a lot of ways.
Oh,
And
yeah.
so there's that in their bubbling. And then there's people who are rediscovering this, rediscovering wait, you know, a lot of what really matters is this ability to connect to other people.
Yes.
And so I've been privileged to just be, I feel called to it, and there are many people calling out to me about it. And so this has been just a really intense time for me, but in a very good sense, a very good sense.
Yes. That's awesome. And
how's it going for you?
It's going really good. I mean, for me, there's not a whole lot that I'm doing that's that much different. I mean, I'm doing stuff with the Circling Institute, and you know, we're starting all kinds of new stuff. My wife is home, which is really great.
Yeah,
and we brought everything online, which is, you know, I was pretty hesitant on doing. But like now that we've done it, it actually works remarkably well.
Yeah.
And
people
so I'm
acculturating.
Yeah,
right?
Totally. So I'm having people, like, we're doing, we just opened enrollment for the first Circling training course online. And so we're having people from all over the world, right? Just somebody from Norway just signed up.
That's cool.
Yeah. So it's like, it's really interesting. But like when somebody, you know, we have the Circling nights on every Thursday, and to have all these people from, you know, from all different time zones, even different days, right? Australia and Norway and Russia, and like show up, right? And have a quality of interest that everyone kind of meets with, this kind of quality of interest, or something's been shining forth to them. Maybe you don't even have words for it. However, this medium allows everybody to actually find each other, which is amazing. I mean, it's kind of like, just think about it. It's like, how would we have ever met, right?
Yeah.
If it wasn't for this.
We've yet to meet in person. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
exactly.
Absolutely. So yeah, I think this time for me has been, well, one thing is I've also just moved to Alameda, which is like a little island right by San Francisco. And I've just been able to I've gone on tons of walks, and I live in this old historical neighborhood. And as I'm walking along, there's Alameda is one of those places that you can't get it just by going to it once. Like, it reveals itself to you. And it's turning out to be the perfect place for Brianne and I. Yeah. So it's like, on one level for me personally, there's like a simplicity and almost a meditativeness, right? Like inwardly, but outwardly on all these other levels, I'm like more, I'm reading more crazy stuff, and like meditating in these different ways and doing all these experiments, and I'm exploring and pushing edges on a pretty profound level.
That's great.
At the same time.
And it's really weird how this is bifurcating. Right? So, I mean, some of us are very lucky, privileged, like you are, I am, that, you know, our lives have a particular structure to them that has a resiliency to them. Other people are not so fortunate, right? And both physically and psychologically, they're being hammered really, really hard. And I get to talk to some of those people, and trying to reach out and provide some kind of support and help for them has been something I've been trying to address. As you know, I've been doing a free online meditation and contemplation class and a course, and that I'm getting. The feedback I'm getting is that people are finding it very helpful, very relevant, very helpful. But I am very cognizant of the fact, like I said, that this is a very strange time. The system is being very radically destabilized. And that always brings with it tremendous suffering and distress. But, but it also brings both individually, as you and I are finding, but I think even more important collectively, as I think we're both seeing within this new, this almost maelstrom amazing conversations and community building that's occurring, right?
Yeah.
There's also, it's a tremendous opportunity for people too. And so I feel for both of those reasons, for both of them together, almost like stereoscopic vision, I feel a tremendous urgency right now. There's a tremendous urgency right now.
Oh yeah, totally. Yeah, there is an urgency, and there's a way to commune about it, right? Just get this sense that there's when I look at like the Rebel Wisdom community, and I look at all the people watching our videos, and all like the Discord server, all the things that we're talking about. I'm like, okay, where were those people before all this, right? Like there's a way where there's a certain kind of quality of conversation, or an openness to a certain, and what I like about it, it's a mode that's distinct for me, because it's not just like, as I think you would talk about, it's not just the embodiment, authentic relating, right, mode, but it's also, and it's not just the kind of academic or intellectual mode, but it seems to be attracting people who have a sense for both of them, right?
Yes.
And want to hang and like have a sense of being interested, and drawn to that. And
they're not academics, and they're not just into the importance, because you know more than anybody else, and I've experienced the importance of that kind of interpersonal intimacy, and I that word means a lot for me, right? The interpersonal intimacy you get in certain. But these people, they're connoisseurs of intelligibility. They want to taste, they want, right, and so and so they're the people that I'm trying. Well, this is a group project, right? That we're trying to work. I'm just saying what I'm putting a lot of my work into, and I know you are too. This is what I'm trying to, craft. Double vision, looking back to the best historical templates we have, looking at the current cutting edge emerging practices and community of practices, craft the psychotechnology of dialectic to afford dialogos so that people know what it is like to taste by knowing, right? The serious play with intelligibility, and what does that mean? Not just as a cognitive agent, but what does it mean as an existential being? That's why that community is the community that I'm especially trying to reach. And so generally I find that people that are sort of purely academically oriented or purely theoretically oriented, they sort of go, what's this? And where's the theory? And I say, well, I've got lots of theory elsewhere. This is something else I'm trying to do here. And then the people, then there's other people, you probably encounter this a lot. It's like, well, I just want to feel close to other people. And it's like, yes, but we need more than that right now, right? We need more than that right now. We need a lot more right now. The community, like the people that you're identifying as a population, that's the people that I am most most concerned to help, to afford, to address, and to listen to.
Right, absolutely. And the thing that you've been talking about lately, I've heard you talk about lately, is these two distinctions, right? Bringing together a couple of things. I wanted to highlight them and pin them, because it gets to what you wanted to talk about in the beginning, I think, and which I want to circle back around to, which is this way of looking at, right, that where the two, you could say, bottom up and top down, right, kind of meet and bleed into each other and point to each other, right? This sense of like being with somebody and their suchness.
Right?
And at
the
same
suchness of the moreness,
right. And in the same time, there's in dialogos, there's reaching into and being reached by the inexhaustible, right? The beyondness, the moreness, right? And and when you put it like that, right? It's interesting, because I thought I had a felt sense of exactly I thought that was the perfect two things to bring it together in that way, because I've noticed this sense. And in fact, I just uploaded a circle I did, a training circle I did onto my channel, which was kind of going deep into this, getting this person's essence, right? But it just bled into these kind of really big insights, right?
Yep.
And it was almost like you could talk about the most like difficult personal thing for her and what's opening up around that, to like the nature of the universe at the same time. It's like at some point they just like they became figure ground, and then they just started to bleed into each other. Like,
I think that's exactly right. And I think you're alluding to the conversation I had with Paul Vanderklay about this. And so I was, I'm not very happy. With the term, but I don't. And some of the people on the Discord server were saying, "Could you come up with a better term?" But I mean, it was circled around this idea that I was playing with, of trying serious play with, of trying to give a secular version of soul. Right? Because I want to. One of the things that I'm really working on right now is, this is going to be talking about a Rebel Wisdom. I'm trying to break out of the three monos. The idea, that the mind is monolithic. It has one way of knowing, propositional knowing, right? The idea that the mind is ultimately monologic, and that reason is monologic, rather than what all the accumulating evidence and practice is showing. No, it's ultimately dialogical in nature.
Right.
And then the mind is monophasic. There's one state of consciousness you should be in, and only that state of consciousness gives access to reality, and all the other ones are just aberrant. I'm trying to break out of all of that in a significant fashion. And so what Descartes did was he tied the notion of soul and self. He first of all fused them together, and then he tied that to that inner point of subjectivity that is the center of the monolith, that triple mono mind, that three dimensions of being sort of monolithic, monophasic, right? Monologic. And I'm thinking, well, what if we try to so there's this wonderful word that Carey uses in his book on Augustine and the invention of the inner self. He says the word he actually wants is the Latin word inventio, which means both to discover and to invent. So things that we see as dichotomous, think about how relevant that is to dialogos, because you're both discovering and inventing, right?
Right.
I said to Paul, I wanted to try and reinventio soul to break out of that, right, that triple monism, right, of mind, that triple monism of mind. And I wanted to redo it in terms of its phenomenology and functionality. And that's what I was trying to get at, right? Oh, I was trying to get at something like analogous. Geez, I hope I'm not offending people. I really don't want to. Paul didn't take offense. Something analogous to worship, like what reverence is, because this is part of what you and I are talking about with the dialogos, right? The reverence for the logos when it emerges. And I was trying to get at, okay, well, the soul was the faculty of worship. What does that mean? Well, normally that means just sort of praising and stating things. But I thought, well, what if, right? What if it's the faculty that mediates between the moreness and the suchness? Right? Your soul is that which, right? So your spirit is that which affords you self-transcendence, but your soul is the locus, right? It's the horizon of intelligibility, the Janus-space thing that is simultaneously, synoptically, right? Like stereoscopic vision, like symbolon joining together. It's what's seeing together, symbolon together, the moreness and the suchness. That's the soul. And then just like you were saying, you picked up on this perfectly. I've been talking to Chris about, that the soulful nature of dialogos, right? That what happens is you get, if the logos is present, you get a sense simultaneously of the moreness of participation, but the suchness of individuation, and those two mysteries are just resonating with each other. And there's this faculty that comes into awareness. So I'm trying to reinvent right? So there's something soulful about dialogos, and what it does is it picks up on that part of us that is the active symbolon between the moreness and the suchness. And Paul actually really liked that as sort of a secular version of soul. So I'm just trying to, I mean, you see, you know what I'm doing, of course. I'm trying to bring as much of the theurgia into the theoria of the Olympus as possible. So that thing you just said, sorry, it was so pregnant, I had to unpack it a lot.
Totally.
Right? There's so much going on.
Let's midwife it.
There's so much going on there because you know, it picks up on, you know, what Chris and I are talking about in the chapter, you know, that the sensibility transcendence is really picking up on the suchness of another person. And then the anagoge is picking up on the moreness. But you, every participant, is soulful in that they are the symbolon, right? The stereoscopic fusion and symbolon of the moreness and the suchness. And that's part of the phenomenology and the functionality of being in dialogos. Right.
Yeah, totally.
So and this is to remember, sati, anamnesis. This is to remember the soul and to break out of the Cartesian monism, right? That the monism of mind, the monolithic, you know, monophasic, monological mind. And say, no, mind is, well, let's reserve mind for problem solving and cognition. Soul is this existential mediating function.
Yeah, totally. And this, you know, bringing that back into just, you know, I'm taking all this and I'm just bringing this back into this sense of what you're talking about, which is this help me out with this, but what you were talking about, this sense of speaking or thinking.
Oh yeah, right? Yeah.
In this.
Yeah. So I mean, when people sometimes ask me to give them the elevator pitch for dialectic. So dialectic is the psychotechnology. Dialogos is the process you participate in. Right. So you can do dialectic, but you can only participate in dialogos. This is very similar to the distinction between dialectic and dialogue. Right. In the book that you and I are both reading. But the elevator pitch I give to people is you've realized dialogos when you're both getting to a place that neither one of you could have gotten to on your own, right? And people have an intuitive sense of what that means. So it's great for practice. Oh I sort of know what that means. And then they sort of, well, how do I get there? And then that's a really good opening. It's a good elevator pitch. But then I was thinking, okay, but let's get a little bit more fine grained. Let's a finer resolution. And I was thinking about, well, part of what that means, not comprehensively, but part of what it means is I've been noticing that when I'm practicing it with you guys or with other people, that I'm doing this weird thing. Normally, you know, people think and then they speak, right? And then they listen and then they think, right? And there's a little bit of online. But there's something different when I start practicing dialectic and dialogos starts to present itself, which is I find that I'm thinking by speaking.
Thinking by speaking.
So that's like I'm trying to get, there's a felt sense and a felt difference in functionality between being being monologic, you're just talking in your head, and then when I put it out and I'm speaking to you and I'm getting your online feedback, even gesturally, and you know, and intuitively and implicit learning, then what happens is, right, I'm noticing that the act of articulating my words in your presence is actually, you know, it's articulating in the sense of it's articulating my thinking. My thinking is coming into shape as I'm speaking, right? Like I can't tell you what my thought is going to be until the speaking has sort of finished a cycle of resonance with
you. Oh, interesting.
And so that reminded me of something, and you and I talked about this before. I tried to think about where else have I felt that kind of thing, and it reminded me of when teaching is going well, I'm learning as I'm teaching, right? And I'm teaching because I'm learning as I'm teaching. Like my learning isn't done and then I'm teaching, and I'm not just learning. I'm simultaneously teaching and learning as I'm teaching. Like the active teaching is opening things up, right? And there's the teaching and the learning are happening in this completely parallel and interpenetrating fashion. And then I realized that's not just an analogy or a similarity, because in the figure of Socrates, both of those are happening, right? The thinking by speaking and the teaching by learning are also like this happening together.
Right, totally. And there's also this sense in which, I mean, I'm seeing visually all the, the normativity, right?
Yes.
That is, that's being this, you're using your hands, and me too, like hands back and forth, like this sense of like finding each other, right? Co-finding each other, shaping each other. And in that, as that normativity starts to catch hold, right? You start to break into, you start saying stuff that you didn't know about.
Yes,
right?
Exactly.
Like, but it's wedded in some way to the other person's listening in that particular way, where it's like the speaking, it's as if, my words are more like the thought, and the other person is more like the representation of that thought, like realizing itself back around, right?
Yeah.
Like,
that's very well said.
Yeah.
That's very well said.
Because there is that part of listening, which is really interesting to think about listening, like this relationship between listening and thought, right? Because
did you get this book? I think you might. One of my students recommended it to me.
Yeah.
Right. I'm just about to start it.
Oh yeah, totally. Yeah, I've read that like 5-10 times.
Yeah, so I'll be
That's
happy
a really good book. That's a really good book.
Yeah.
But one of the things that she actually goes into a lot is that, well, she talks about how, and this is what had me start thinking about it, is how listening is really, we think about listening usually like being an empty vessel and sound comes in and we receive the sound. That's not it at all. No. It's synonymous with interpretation. And in some way, right, when you talk and I listen, if I'm listening, right, and I start thinking, is the moment I stop listening.
Yes.
Right? And I think that shows how wedded listening and thinking really are.
You have to be together.
Yeah.
Right. So I think of listening more and more like, like the internalization that is needed for genuine sensibility transcendence in John Wright's sense. Like this is again, right? Part of when I'm listening, what I'm doing is trying to tailor my attention, my memory, my receptivity to your suchness.
Yeah.
Right. So like I feel like, oh, here's a suchness, and then behind me and behind you, sort of around us all, is the moreness. Right. And so right, I try to speak the moreness and I try to listen to your suchness. Does that make any sense? But that's how
the moreness and I listen to your suchness. Yeah.
Yes.
Exactly. It's almost like where it's like in some way, like right now I'm kind of, I can hear it. I'm like listening for what's being thought.
Yes.
Right? And then you said, yes, exactly. Right. So there's that sense in which I listen for and then I speak it. Right. And then you respond in that sense. And there's something that like, what's the like, then that goes back over here. What does that do? Right.
So,
and I'm wondering about if that's kind of the normativity or the sense of honing into the sweet spot, like feeling into, and here's that thing about like, okay, that sense in which I've noticed this too, of where you're listening to somebody and then something happens and it breaks the flow and it's agitated, right? But I didn't know that there was a flow I was tuned into until it broke. right?
Right.
So there's that sense of like, on some level, we both are finding out what we're tuning into, right?
Yep.
And that seems to be that sense of like, is that what you and Chris have been talking about, the Geist, right?
Yeah, the Geist, the third factor.
Yeah.
I think the Geist is the soul of a dialogos, the way, right? So what you're getting is like, so it reminds me of Fisher's notion of wonder. And wonder is you're on the horizon of intelligibility. And what the logos is, right? It's the presence of the horizon of intelligibility. It's the moreness of intelligibility shining through the suchness of what's being particularly spoken in a non-repeatable fashion, right? If we try to make this in any way formulaic, we'll lose it. We'll lose it. It always has to be jazz, right? It always has to be jazz. Totally. And I was trying to think about, okay, well, again, what's that doing? Well, we're not just talking about the logos, we're embodying it, we're instantiating it, but then we're also, right, it is also symbolon, it's also affining us, to the way being is disclosing itself, right? But as I keep saying, the dialogos affines us to the ontologos. And so for me, that moment of the third factor, like you said, that where I mean, part of it is cognitive science. Part of it is what's happening is you and I are figuring out, right, how to get into the zone of proximal development. You're putting enough challenge on me that I have to stay really engaged. You give me, like, if I start to break out of authenticity, you start to give me error signal really rapidly, even by like your brows will go down slightly, or your head will so and it's tightly coupled. But so we're doing all the flow stuff, but we're doing more than that, right? Because there's also this and this is what I'm trying to talk. We're trying to, right? We're trying to give birth, right? It's a deeper conception of conception, right? We're trying to give birth, like that. This flow itself that's not the goal. The flow it's great, but the flow is ultimately the affordance of a reorientation of faith, coming into right relationship with other people, right relationship with ourselves, right relationship with being. That's what this is ultimately about. Right,
totally. Coming into right relationship.
Yes.
Like this it's both a reveal, it's a revealing, right? And a coming to being revealed. It's
exactly.
What I like about that, it's almost like undogmatizable.
Right? Exactly. And so, corresponding to trying to reinvent your soul, trying to reinvent your faith in terms of this sense of faithfulness. And Jordan and I have been talking a lot about this, Jordan Hall and I. Like, think about how you're faithful to Brianna. It doesn't mean that you don't have a set of dogmas. You don't have. I now have you finite. I have my set of unchangeable beliefs about you. Right. That's not what it means. In fact, that's the disaster. If you get it, it means I have coupled the emergence of me to the emergence of you, so that those will always be affording and constraining each other. And so that's faithfulness, right? That's faithfulness. And so that's
that continuity of contact.
Yes, that continuity of contact. Yes.
Right. The continuity of contact.
And so thinking about right relationship as evolving, adaptive continuity of contact, not, as you said, as any closure or dogmatization.
Right. By the way, I really have enjoyed the psychologist that you've had on a couple of times. I think he's also, That last one where he brought up the picture and laid out the model.
The justification stuff.
So there's something about this thing about being a forum, right? Like the world being a forum in which I am on trial, right? On some level for justification, right? So I want to just kind of like think about this, right?
But that's so Socratic,
Right.
That what we're doing, that we, and this is what Christopher Moore argues so brilliantly in his book, and you see it also in Gonzalez's book, right?
Yeah.
That we only really know ourselves as persons when we enter the field of justification, right? Which is not the field of blame. It's not the field of accusation. This is how we mess these things up. It's the field of justification. And that, Greg Enriques and I'm going to have him on regularly, like once a month on Voices with Vervaeke. I really want you to talk to him.
Right.
I think it'd be really amazing.
Yeah.
But Moore's idea, right? That it's not introspection. It's not even reflection. It's not going over my autobiography. How I know myself as a person is only seeing how I enter into and commit myself within the arena of justification.
Yes.
So self-examination and the examination of the ways of life to which I'm willing to commit myself, and how they are affine to the ways of speaking to which I'm willing to commit myself. That's the only way of knowing yourself as a person.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, I've thought about this a bunch of times. Of like, if you took an infant, you put it on a desert, like an island, and it just grew up, like, what would it would say? It could speak, right? Which it couldn't, but like, when you asked it about itself, what would it say?
It reminds me of Wittgenstein's things. Even if lions could speak, we wouldn't understand them. This would be a biological human being, presumably linguistic in some fashion. But I mean, I say this really carefully, and I don't want to fall into some sort of easy moral error or be subject to unreasonable moral judgment. But it wouldn't speak as a person. It wouldn't speak as a person because it hasn't had to take listen to the word, hasn't had to take responsibility for, tending the logos.
Yes. So there's something about, right, if we look at like dialogos and the conditions of dialogos, right? Like on one level, what we're talking about is like it's like what you're saying is the very stuff of which our development develops through, right? Totally. It's like, it's on some level, it's like, some of this stuff is just developmental psychology in a lot of ways. However, I think the thing that for whatever reason, right, this kind of sense about what's possible in relating this way as a spiritual practice, right, has not really, I've not seen it, right? I've not seen it in the way that we're talking about. I think that there's the Platonic dialogues, right? But most of that is just, most of that stuff has just been studied, systematized and studied in academic settings. But the sense of, and I wonder too what you think about this blind spot where when Gonzalez starts to talk about, like, no, you can't just interpret the content of the dialogue. You got to look at the process itself is kind of, in so many ways, is the place where you find out where the thing really is.
It's the point of the dialogues. That's what Gonzalez argues. Albo-Rappe argues. Moore argues. Like this is played, like you and I are paying attention. I'm saying to the listeners, pay attention. There's this growing convergence about how much the drama is doing as much work as the arguments within the Platonic dialogues. All of that, very, very much.
Right. In fact, oftentimes the arguments are just bring you to this aporia where all of a sudden none of the answers, right? That classic, right, ironic, like Socratic thing is where everything just falls apart, and then everyone's really like ecstatic right at the end. And
and people, and Gonzalez points out that, but what you get the people who are often the combative interlocutors with Socrates saying, but I want my sons to come and spend time with you. Because again, a way of life, a right relationship to the logos of intelligibility has been disclosed to them. And they have an intuitive sense that being around somebody who can regularly bring this practice about is going to be beneficial to their kids in a way in which the over technicalization of the sophist and just the obviousness of common sense won't educate. Because to think about what you said a few minutes ago, this stuff we're talking about here, this is the guts of personhood. And spirituality and reverence are about, accessing and activating and celebrating and accelerating personhood. I mean, that's what it's about.
Yes.
And so it got me thinking about also what you just said a minute ago. Sorry, you're setting up firecrackers in my mind, right? But fireworks, about the normativity. And I was thinking that when we want to turn this, because we're doing it all naturally, but I'm trying to think about, okay, but to teach, to model.
Yeah.
I thought, I don't think it's happenstance that the dialogues are about virtues.
Yeah.
Because virtue is the place where the moreness and the suchness, where the intelligibility and the normativity are coming together. It's like that's the top, because it's both. It's by its very nature, it has to be shareable with others, but it has to be personally relevant to you within your ability as a person to commit yourself to the forum of justification. The logos brings together intelligibility and commitment. So the main topics of philosophia should be the virtues. It should be like, what is love? But I'm going to expand the virtues. What is meaning? What is wonder? What is beauty? Like all of these, that's like, so it's not going to be like pure philosophy where we're going to talk about the nature of cause or blah, 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 blah. But it's going to be, it's not happenstance that the topics are the virtues.
And this is where your intuition about how if you do lectio divina in a group, right, will kind of naturally kind of just give rise most likely to dialogos, right?
Yeah. Because, I mean, so if readers want to see this, they can go to my channel and the lesson I gave yesterday on how to practice lectio divina. It should not be practiced until it's an advanced technique. You should go through, you should have at least an introductory course in meditation and contemplation before you practice Lectio. But let's take that for granted. Yeah, I think the point about Lectio as a bridging practice is because on one side it reaches into the propositions because you're reading. But like part of the Lectio is you set yourself to listen, right? You recite it and you set yourself with an intention to resonate with it and to read for transformation, not to read for information.
Yeah.
So you recite and you resonate, and then you're open to what grabs your attention. Yeah. And then you internalize it, and then you enact it imaginally, not in your imagination space introspectively, you like projectively on the world. And then what would it be like to live this way, right? What would it be like to actually commit myself to this sort of an existential ethics? Then what's disclosed about being, if I were to live this way, and correspondingly, here's the normativity, what would be demanded from me in order to come into conformity with that realization? Yeah. And then the idea is, so I'm teaching people how to do it individually, but on the Discord server, we're talking about, but we want to do this communally, and that's so important, right? Yeah, yeah. And what I see it happening is one person would do the recitation, and then everybody has their own individual moments where they're going through this process of Lectio Divina. Yeah. But then they start to share all the different perspectival and participatory transformations that they're getting an inkling of, that they are getting a taste, connoisseur, of how to aspire. And then I think that will naturally start to lead into, dialogos, because, the sacred prose, the sacred poetry and the sacred prose, and you should read both, by the way, one of each, because you want them to talk to each other so that they can talk to you, right? Right. But that's going to naturally, the Lectio is going to reach back, because you do it after you've done a meditative or contemplative practice or a prajna practice, a non-duality practice. It's going to reach back to that. That's going to afford you resonating with the propositions, but moving into the perspectival and participatory. And then that's going to, when you're doing it in group, it's going to naturally feed into dialogos, because what you're training is really the virtue that is needed for aspiration
right.
and transformation, which is the virtue of reverence. Paul Woodruff's idea that reverence is a virtue. Reverence is a particular kind of relevance realization that properly puts you into right relationship to what awe and wonder disclose to you as possibilities.
Yeah. In fact, I'm wondering about, like, so now I'm just flashing back to like all the moments that were like that, like this body memory, but like things, and so like some of the most immediate ones, right, are, and it has me wonder, is the thing that becomes present, and we in a certain sense see, right, when the suchness and the moreness like are, you know, were foreground, once they become foreground, back, and they do this switching at some point, they bleed into each other where it's just animating. I'm wondering, is like, it's kind of like when I think about that sense of being deeply moved by somebody, right?
Yes.
Like, that sense of being in reverence, right? Like I'm disclosed in disclosing them, right? And that there's that sense of like reverence where their suchness is just alive. I think it's usually, I'm wondering about on another level, if that's like almost like we're in the direct to the virtue, that I'm actually seeing a virtue in you, right? That is that in some way is like the, I don't know, if there was if there was an essential, if it was a sound, right? Like, is that the sense of where the virtue, where the suchness and the moreness meet, that's the point where the sound of the virtue goes, ooh.
I think that's exactly right. And, you know, and so Murdoch talks about this in The Sovereignty of the Good. And that's where John Wright got the notion of sensibility transcendence from. So when those two, like, the virtue, I think, is the virtue. I would say this is how she says it. I'm now seeing you in a virtuous manner. She says that the primary act of virtue, of ethics, is proper attention. Attending to things justly is the core of any, that's the core virtuous act for her, right? Because if that's where that nexus point you're pointing to. And I think attending to things justly is a part of what reverence means, right? And again, this is the secular overlap with what worship used to mean. Worship used to mean being sort of a sycophantic toady to God. And I don't mean anything insulting to the people that I know who I think, you know, but I'm talking about a caricature that has become prevalent in popular culture. Monty Python has made fun of it, like in The Meaning of Life, right? Oh God, you're so really big, don't burn us. You know, all that kind of crap, right? But what I think was what was going on in, what I guess, for lack of a better term, I don't like this adjective, but authentic worship, right? What was exactly that? It's the sense of, you know, there is a just attention that carries that I should have to God, and that brings with it a sense of reverence that I add into the virtue of maintaining the right relationship with that which continually can be a fount of intelligibility for me through awe and wonder. Right. That's what I'm trying to unpack here.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's that sense in which the virtue in which I'm seeing, let's just say I see something about you in your life, right, in that moment, and something shines for and just moves me. Right?
Yes. And Plato talks about that. Remember in the symposium, he says, you move from, and we've talked about this, the beauty, right? You move from the physical beauty, right, to the beauty of virtue, right?
Right, yes.
Right? And exactly that. So I think that's exactly right when that moment sort of crystallizes.
Right. And there's that, and it's really interesting because at those moments, I noticed that it's so, there is a silence that's so much at ease in partaking, right?
Because I think that's where the theory of theory, remember we talked about this, because what happens when you're talking about virtue,
right?
People are, right, they're what they're doing is they move from reflecting to participating in its exemplification.
Yeah. Yeah.
You and I, you think about how you and I are doing this. I know you're doing it. I'm doing it.
Yeah.
Right? We're trying to notice in what we're doing the very virtue that we're also talking about. This is what I mean by thinking and by speaking. The speaking, right, is sort of, what you're doing is you're constantly moving between reflection and exemplification. That's why I can't think independently of speaking it. The speaking is where I engage in the mirroring of the exemplification. Right. When we connect, it's like, and so I can continually go back and forth between, right, and this is what you should be doing in good phenomenology, right? I continually going back and forth between, here's my conceptualization, here's my articulation, here's my attempt to speak the intelligibility of the logos, but here is my connectedness. Here's my participation in exemplification of the very thing. And virtues do that for us.
Yes.
Virtue is the topic that not only commits us to aspiration, it also constantly toggles us between speech, reflective speech, and speech that exemplifies and enacts.
Right, totally. Oh, interesting. It's like, it's interesting because the virtues themselves, right? If it makes sense to call it themselves, right?
Yeah.
It seems like virtues are those things that, like, it's a little bit, they're starting to occur to me a little bit like light. You know how light has it withdraws in its complete disclosure, right?
But that's it. That's the whole point about, the virtues, and Plato makes very clear, and Highland makes this really clear in the question of beauty, that things like beauty should be, your ability to relate to beauty properly should be considered a virtue as well, right? But think about what constantly happens, as you pointed out in the dialogues. We can't get a definition of courage. What we can get is an ongoing right relationship to it, not just in thought, in reflection, but because we're exemplifying it, it's also calling us to commitment. It's calling us to the space of justification, right? It's calling us to transformation. We can't get a definition, but we can't rely on just our untutored intuitions about courage either. We have to enter into this process, and all we get is an ongoing right relationship. Virtues are also the thing that steer us between definition and untutored intuition.
Totally. It's almost like there's a sense of getting a sense of like tuning an instrument, like the pitch, right? Totally. It's a tonas,
Yes, and then you've got to say that, Guy. You have to say that. You're Heidegger incarnate here, right? And the attunement, right?
Yeah.
But for the longest time, when I first read that, I only got it sort of conceptually.
Yeah.
And then I sort of got it phenomenologically. But now, and I hope this is the right adjective, I'm getting it spiritually. I'm getting what that attunement means. How it's bound up with soulfulness and faithfulness and virtue in the way we're talking about here.
Right, totally. Well, it's interesting, kind of like when you think about attunement, it's that thing where it's interesting. Attunement is one of those things where it's like it's kind of a little bit like, Aquinas talks about time, right? If you don't ask me, I know exactly what time is, right?
Augustine.
So the moment you ask me, I realize I have no idea. I'm totally perplexed, right? There's a sense with attunement that is kind of like that. Like, if you don't ask me what attunement is, I know exactly what it is, because but there's something about when you go, what is attunement? But there is this quality of, like, I was thinking about this, like with the sense of, right, I was thinking about tears and grief, right? And like oftentimes what I see is that when someone's in grief, right, for example, it's like, and they're alone, there's a way in which it's not totally grief until they speak about it, right?
Well, I got to tell you about something.
Yeah, please.
So, I want to slow down, because I want to treat this with proper reverence. But I was doing one of the live classes, and somebody brought up, and I won't disclose their name because I don't want to trespass on privacy, but I do want to express, gratitude for their honesty and their courage. They brought up that they were in grief, and they were asking, well, how can the practice help? And part of what I tried to articulate is how grief has to be shared, not because there's a solution. Grief is a permanent aporia, right? To use our language here. But what we're after is the way in which grief deeply humanizes us, in the sense of puts us into that soulful faithfulness, right?
Yes.
Because I was talking about, I related the story of, I'll quickly do it here because I think it's helpful. So a woman comes to the Buddha and her son has died. This is I love this because it was one of those things that like moved me. Right? Yeah. And she says to the Buddha, you know, resurrect him because I love my son. I'm in such deep grief. And he says no, because he always refused to do miracles, right? And she keeps asking him, and she's persistent. So then he turns to her. He says, okay, I will do it, but first you have to do one thing. You have to go into the city and you have to go to a household and find a household where there's a mustard seed. And she, oh, great, that's easy. Wait, one thing. It has to be that nobody in that household has tasted death or grief.
Yeah.
Right? And so she goes in and she knocks on the door and, do you have any mustard seed? And just one. Oh, yeah, sure. But has anybody tasted death? Oh, yes, of course. And then she goes from house to house to house to house. And then she goes, oh. And then she comes back to the Buddha and she says, thank you. Now I get it. Now I get it. Right? And then I said that what we need is there's no answer, there's no proposition. What we need is we need to felt seen. I thought about you when I was saying that. We need to feel seen, we need to feel heard, and we need to be deeply in touch with, you know, that grief is one of I don't want anybody to go through grief. I'm not some sort of masochist. But there is nothing that humanizes us more than growing through grief. Yeah. And one of the wisest people I met in my life, perhaps the wisest I've met in person, he gave me this advice. He said, don't get involved with anybody, like he meant deeply, friendship or romantically, who hasn't experienced grief. Think about that like it's the opposite of the Buddha's story. Because they will not have sunk roots into the depths of their humanity if they have not gone through grief. Totally. Exactly that. It's what we're ultimately, the only thing is to be connected with people who can afford us the only way we can go through grief, which is to grow into somebody else, living in another world. Because that's where we have to go. Because when we lose or somebody dies, our world is destroyed. And we have to grow into another person in another world. That's the only way. And that process, that puts us in touch with our humanity and our personhood. Absolutely. Does.
And then it's kind of like when we go through that, there's a sense in which when we sit with another, because I was thinking about this, back to this thing about with attunement, right? Of that, and I think this is kind of also what we're, you know, in dialogos, is we are tuned by and attuned into, right, these virtues, right?
Yes.
Right.
Yes.
There's a way in which, when I'm, for example, when I'm sitting with somebody with grief, there's attuning to them. There's like kind of feeling what it would be like to be them, and like sensing it and like tuning into it.
But not in a way that's trying to exploit them.
This is, but here's the thing. Here's the thing where I think that the practice of what it, like dialogos, the machinery it exercises, is that, like, I think real attunement though is like, I'm attuning into your grief, right? But I'm also attuning into something that you may not be able to have access in because you're grief, right? Which is, I can tune into qualities of being. I can be attuned with you and your grief. So I'm like, I can tune into you, and I can tune into your future. I can tune into these. And that's like sitting with a wise person, right? Like you get the sense.
That's good. That speaks, that puts into speech sort of an image I had of when people, they need to feel seen and heard, but your presence, I was thinking about, like, what can happen is people are cramped in their grief. Remember a long time you asked me what's different now, and I said I'm not stuck? Remember that? So what happens is you open up this space. You don't say anything to people. There's nothing to say. There's nothing you can say that won't be useless.
Right.
Absolutely useless.
Right.
But what you do is, what you just articulated, is you open up a space, you scaffold access, right? And so that they're not cramped in their grief. They still have to unfold it and unpack it. There's no way, this is what that wise person said to me. He said, there's nothing you can do about grief except go through it.
Yeah.
Like that, right? But what you can do is, like, when you're with somebody and they feel seen and heard, and then you can like, again, if you try and do this in any kind of manipulative fashion, it turns into vice very, very quickly.
Yeah.
But
Totally.
If you can do it virtuously, you can open up a space so the person, you're not alleviating their grief. What you're doing is preventing the grief from being cramped into a kind of stuckness.
Yeah. Yes, absolutely. And there's a way that you think about it. So, it's kind of like, just imagine grieving, right, with Yoda. Right? There's a sense where he would not look away, he would not diminish, he wouldn't deny. In fact, if anything, he'll uncomfortably reflect back to you how painful it is in all of its dimensions, maybe even more than you're feeling it. But at the same time, he's also probably revealing eternity to you at everything beyond it, right? There's that sense of, I really like this sense of attunement and attuning into things and what's happening and also with speech and thought, right? Hearing, right? All these things kind of working together. And this sense of, there's always that sense of where, when the Geist that we've been tuning into, right, at some point shows up as the thing is the thing that was always already the case.
Yes.
Like there's that quality of at some point the always already becomes
like, think about
what you're inside of. Yeah.
But this is the Platonic insight about that feature of the Logos, which one of the things I love about you is you always give voice to that. You always call us back to this, and you always wonder about this, like coming to do reverence about it. But think about, this was Plato's point, and this is part of the anamnesis idea, right? Is that virtues have to have that to them to some degree. If you have and this was part of Aristotle's worry about education and why you have to have the right parents. But if you have if you do not have the power, if you do not have the potency in act, right? The actual potentiality, the activated, the power.
Right.
If you don't have some honesty, I can't teach you honesty, right? I can't. Because if you don't have that commitment, if you don't sense its normativity, right? Like, there's no way. There's no. Right? That you may be. Think about the grief. You may be. I'm thinking of Socrates, and right? You may be cramped. You may be stuck, right? And I can afford you unfolding that. But there's a sense in which it's anamnesis. Like, you always had to have some genuine virtue of honesty. That's why you can exemplify it in the practice and then be called by it. See, so the virtue is where we can really pick up on. We can really, and I mean this word very strongly now, where we can personalize that feature that you keep putting your finger on. That we discover, we come to discover something that was already some degree present and affording us. I come to discover what honesty is only because there was some honesty in you and I already there, affording the discussion of honesty.
Right. Oh, interesting. So interesting. I just want to kind of hang with that for a second. You had that sense of that always already, right?
Yeah.
It is when it reveals itself, right? There's a sense like this is where things like faith and trust seem to be something just indigenous to it, right?
I agree.
There's something about finding like that. There's that experience of like you just think you're fucked, right? You just think it's like you're in some kind of catastrophic thing, and it's like you're just convinced it's all going to fall apart. And then at some point, something happens, or you realize, or somebody says something, and all of a sudden you're like, whoop, and you're like, oh, it's fine. In fact, it was fine the whole time, right? And there's that sense in which, like, where it's been okay in this way that I couldn't produce it, like, out of nothing.
Yeah.
There's something about that recognition of the background. It's always already been in there. And it could be concealed from me and it still operate and organize the experience and be present without, like, in a certain sense, without me.
Yes.
Right. Even maybe in spite of me on some level, right? That there's some kind of sense of, because there's that quality of, like, I'm thinking about when like the quality of awareness or being, or the felt sense of what Winnicott talks about, the holding environment.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Because on some level, I think that there's a way in which we're always tuned into a certain way, because we're always inside of something. We're always in the world. So there's always the way it seems, or it is. And there's a quality of, like, holdedness, right? And so there's something about these kinds of dialogues, right, that are so encouraging, right?
Yes.
Right.
Good word, by the way. Good
totally.
Word.
It's like they're encouraging. And I think the faith part is this kind of recognition of, oh God, there's an intelligibility that's beyond me. It's operating through me, and it can be concealed from me, and it still goes, right? And then when I find out, there's something about that just goes really deep in the nervous system.
I think your point about how that engenders virtues, like courage, it encourages us. I think it entrusts us.
Right.
It trusts us, and it brings us into a kind of faithfulness. I think that's deeply right.
Yeah.
Notice again, come back to the point that Gonzalez makes.
Yeah.
Notice how the way you could be mistaken about this, that which I discover, but which was always there. You could mistake that with the untutored intuition of common sense. You could, it's just my intuition. It's not that. It's not that. Or you could mistake that with, there's a definition that captures this, and I can then hold on to it by holding on to the definition. You can't faith is not holding on to a dogma or a definition, nor is it just your untutored intuition. See how both of those are mistakes. We're trying to talk about something that's neither just intuition nor formalized possession, right? Because, as you said, you discover that it was always there, but it's also a real discovery. That's why I like this term inventio, right? It's sort of this, between discovery and invention, right? Right. And it's not your possession. You don't, right? So, but, right? See what I'm trying to get? There's a virtue here of getting that sensitivity to that sweet spot where you're sailing between the Scylla and Charybdis of, the obviousness of my intuition and common sense, or, the self-evidence of this formal definition. It's to capture everything completely and consistently. And you're trying to find, right? You're trying to find, and that's what you see the dialogues doing again and again and again. Sail between those, sail between those, sail between those.
Right. Totally. So, and then finding that you, like, that sense. I know Jordan does this a lot, right? Where he'll he'll recognize, oh, wait a minute, I realized when, like, this, maybe it got too fast or something like that, like when it went off, that I was tuning in. There was a flow that was happening that didn't reveal itself until it was gone, right? And then what is that? That sense of finding all of our attention being oriented to something, right?
I think so. And I think it's about, it's all of these things. It's a sense of an emerging, right, relationship, the connectedness, that sense that we are being educated in the sense of adduce, draw forth, that uncramping and unfolding of virtue, but that virtue is always bound up with this necessarily
Yeah.
with the way in which, right,
Yes.
the speaking that is thinking of the logos is becoming beautiful to us and drawing us and saying, look, and you're going, oh yes, this is what I could be.
Oh yeah. This is well, that's there's like the hermeneutic circle.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
That sense of yeah, there's that sense of, as I step forward, right, what I was stepping on like goes into the background, but then becomes in front of me.
Yeah.
In that auto-poetic
exactly.
spiral. Right.
Exactly. That's a fantastic connection.
Yeah.
Exactly.
And so Hermes, the messenger god, language, right?
Yeah, totally. Between the two.
Right.
Always moving between the two.
Yeah. So good. This is so much fun.
Yes, it is.
This is so much fun. Thank you, John.
Well, thank you, Guy. It's like, I mean, it's this. Sorry, I don't want this to sound self-congratulatory, but I want to say I'm trying to express reverence and not be self-congratulatory. But this is this kind of stuff. Yeah. And then the work I'm doing with you and Peter and Jordan, and Chris, right, and like trying to theorize about it, but never to lose touch with the theoria or now the theurgia, right? And trying to get them all, like, that's the most important thing I'm doing. That is the most important thing I'm doing.
Yes, right.
It is what Jordan said it would be. He foresaw that as this gets worked out, it becomes, the meta psychotechnology that shepherds and curates and coordinates. It feeds from, but it also really feeds back into all of the other practices I practice and teach and try to share with people. It's becoming so important to me. Yeah.
It's like it's gathering. I get this sense of, and I've been watching this with you. Because when we first talked, I don't think the sense of dialogos was articulated yet. In fact, I watched one of your first videos with Chris when you were doing the series.
Yeah.
In fact, you were like, I'm trying to work this thing out, like that there's something.
Yeah.
Right. And you were talking about it in terms of like the role of religion, right? And like, okay, traditionally religion has taken this, that's become less and less viable. So how is it that we get these things together? And it's so interesting because you could tell you were like, it was present as the struggle of its missing. Right. Oh yeah, totally. Hang on one second. I just, my neighbor, I have to close my door. Hang on. I got a little bit too Socratically inspired for my neighbor's taste. But that sense of, there was just that sense of you were aware, and then it seems like dialogos, right? And this thing just went, like everything's just started to come together, and I'm getting this sense of everything seems to be gathering itself. Like, and there's the logos, right?
Totally. The gathering of the logos in the face, like really picking up on that, in the face of the kairos, that this is what is singing to me right now most pressingly, but also beautifully. Right? Like that's exactly, and that moment where Jordan said that to me, right? And so I had these very good faith criticisms by Jonathan Pajot and Paul Vanderklay, and they were like right? And then when Jordan said that, and then I had that moment of coming to something that responded to them, but I couldn't have done any of it on my own. It had to be like it was with and through him. Yeah. And then I started, I was already in dialogue with you. Just starting, and I started to see this unfolding. That's when it all came together, and I realized, this is it. That was the touchstone, right? That started to reveal,
when he said the meta technology of the meta technology, and then you're like the next day you're like, I think the thing that's circling may be the thing that and then that's been the conversation that
going,
Yeah.
And more people now are spontaneously, and this is how you can tell when I think you're really starting to get something, is more and more people are starting to see how these things could, how they could instantiate and exemplify and afford the religion that's not a religion.
Yeah.
So more and more people are saying, I'm getting a sense, like you just did, about, and again, I'm not the author of this.
Yeah.
I'm not a founder. That's a ridiculous idea. But the sense, right? Like, I'm getting a sense of what this could be. Like it's now, it's gone from being an abstract proposition or just some image. It's gone to being, no. This is actually nascent. There is something that is coming to birth right now. And so that for me is like, okay, I stop and I pay very careful attention. The same thing I do with like when I'm teaching my students. When they start to, when they start to get the gathering, like you say, and it starts to take on a life of its own, that's when it's like, yeah. I think you're exactly right. This is what is so exciting about right now. And again, how to do this virtually, how to be properly in relationship with this excitement and this creativity without losing touch with the suffering and the distress that are happening, and how to keep them like in proper proportion. That's what ratio eventually, ratio was the Latin of logos, right? But it was trying to, the proper proportioning was how they tried to get the sense of logo.
Totally.
That to me is something, again, I'm trying to get, like, how do we do that?
And that kinship and that friendship with the logos. Right?
Yes.
Like I was thinking about, like, in a certain sense, how like Aristotle would talk about, like, that we think with the logos, right?
Yeah.
Like that like we think with it, right? Yeah. But then there's a certain point where it's like you think with it, but then at some point, like, it kind of like the logos almost takes over, right?
It's through you, yeah.
And there's a point where the logos thinks logos, right?
Well, yeah. For me, and that's where the musical metaphors from Taoism are really helpful. Because initially, you're listening to the music and then you start to pick it up. But then what starts to happen is, instead of you just sort of listening to the music, it's almost like you start to become yet another instrument in the orchestra, right? You get orchestrated by the music, as like just any other instrument. It goes back to your tuning metaphor.
Yeah,
right?
Yeah, absolutely. And that sense too of, and kind of going back to towards the beginning of our conversation, just bringing in that whole thing about, just wondering about this, like, and I don't know if I understand his model completely, but that whole thing about the justification, what did he call that when it comes out, your friend, where it comes out of
so he originally talked about it as the justification hypothesis, but then he moved into sort of a justification system. It's Greg Henri's. I really recommend people check out that discussion with him.
That was, he is really, he's his ability to think really clearly, right, about, and just take all of these things. He's just really, I want to speak with him.
You should.
Yeah.
I wanted. He's going to be on I think he's been on the Discord server, my Discord server. Like I said, Greg and I are going to do. He's been sort of following all the stuff I'm doing on consciousness right now. Yeah. And so he and I are going to have another discussion, and we're going to do it about sort of consciousness, the problem of consciousness. But we're going to try and circle through his work and mine. He sees really deep connections with, the tree of knowledge that he's been working on, the attempt to get a synoptic integration of psychology, and the work I'm doing on relevance realization, the synoptic integration and cognitive science. What's happening is that, it's reciprocal opening between his work and I. There's been a later book by Sperber and Wilson. No, not Sperber and Wilson, my mistake. Sperber and Mercier, called The Enigma of Reason, where they basically argue for that reason is properly a property and process within distributed cognition. It's dialogical, not monological in nature. Big tome of a book. The thing of it is, Greg, I mean, there's been a dispute between them, right? But it's clear to my mind after looking at both, Greg has absolute precedent. He published way before they did. His argument, almost everything that they have in their argument, he has in his, right? I think the way to think about it is, I don't think they stole from him. At least I don't have any good reason for saying that. I think they should properly give him academic precedence. That's what you should do. Yeah. And sort of held off on that. I'm not happy with that. But what you've got is you've got two, and the similarities are so telling. You've got this powerful convergence of all of this work being integrated independently and then converging on this idea. And Greg deserves real credit for this. I'm not trying to take away from Sperber and Mercier, but Greg really deserves credit for this, for that, reason is ultimately dialogical in nature.
Totally. In this sense of the justification, right? The forum of justification.
No other animal justifies. We are persons precisely because we justify. And here's the thing. The justification is always bidirectional. We are always justifying to others and justifying to ourselves, justifying ourselves to others, but we're also justifying others to us.
Right.
Who do we trust? Who is worthy of my trust, right?
Totally. Now, here's the thing about that is that there's a way, no wonder, what I thought when I heard that, I was like, well, no wonder people get nervous when they make eye contact, right? Like there's this phenomenon, I think that's what Levinas really pointed out, kind of phenomenologically. It was like, why is the human face always confront me as an enigma? But there's a sense in which that sense of obligation, I wonder if the obligation is the obligation and responsibility of justification on some level of and what also he said, the thing about the reverse engineering of being able to speak, I thought was a great way of putting it
Well, he and I have been, talking about that, and that's I told him, the design stance is the methodology of cognitive science, and the reverse engineering. I mean, this is what you and I are trying to do here. We're trying to reverse engineer dialectic, right? Of the historical sources and the current practices. And, Greg was very much doing that. I mean, there's something weird, right? Because when it's the face, right? Because animals have something. They have if they're facing each other, there's threat, either a social threat of dominance or threat of predation, right? Or even just confrontation for sexual competition, right? So there's animal threat is there, but then, as you said, and Levinas points out, there's this existential ethical, because we're persons in the space of reason and justification. There's this extra thing that comes on top of it, and then what's really problematic is not only are both happening, we confuse them and we equivocate and we get messed up about those two different things. Right? Very, very often. I've heard people reliably say, and apparently, and there's surveys and polls to support this, that the fear of speaking in front of others is greater than their fear of death.
Yes. Right. Exactly. Because they could die. Their personhood is on trial.
Yes, exactly.
And so this is what's really interesting is a couple of things to look at dialogos in the context of that, right? Of one, it seems like, so there's really toxic versions of that, right? There's toxic versions of that thing going on, right? And that's that experience of shame and humiliation and having to prove yourself, and you have to hide it. Or you have to be, your justification is defensive, right? In some way, it's like being in the courtroom. But I'm just wondering about, it's interesting to think about is can we
move from the courtroom to the courtroom? That's sort of the metaphor that's in my mind. Move from the courtroom to the courtyard?
Yes, exactly. So what's interesting is what is it when you make that move, right? What is the you could say the elevation of that structure, right? What is it that's getting justified, or maybe it's the experience of justice, right?
Yeah, but I think that's it. I think instead of the project of justifying ourselves, right? I'm going to play with that word a little, because serious praise is part of dialogos, right?
Yeah, totally.
You know how when you justify a text where you're right or left justification, where you're trying to come into right relationship so that intelligibility is maximized?
Yeah.
So I think of it like this is a metaphor, that the justification we're pursuing is not the inferential defense of our proposition.
Yes.
It's again the proper alignment for attunement. It's coming into the right relationship.
Totally.
And if people are oriented for that, what happens is I go from the attack mode. I've been thinking about this for the Rebel Wisdom thing on Saturday. I go from attack to amplification, right? If there's something, so the way I challenge you, think about, in order for there to be flow, I have to challenge you.
Yeah.
Right? This isn't just, oh, I agree with you, and we all love each other, and isn't this wonderful, and let's eat granola. It's not that crap, right? I have to challenge you, because if I don't put a demand on you, first of all, you don't have to respond, and secondly, you won't get into the flow state. There is no flow state without demand.
Yes.
But if I attack you, right, then we're into the courtroom. But if I move to amplification, where I say, well, you're talking about courage, and I hear you. First of all, I acknowledge. I make sure that I resonate with you. I'm committed to the process, not the proposition. And then after that, I say, but there's something about courage that I love. There's an aspect that I didn't hear in what you're saying. And what do you think about this? What do you think about this? And I try to get you to unpack. I heard you saying this. Is this right? Is there more here? You do this, Guy. And then what you'll do is you'll first help me unpack. Remember the uncramping? What I'm thinking. And then you'll say, and we all do this to each other when we're there for it, we'll do the amplification. We'll say, but there's I'm putting words, but we usually enact it rather than saying it. It was in words. It's like, but here's another thing about courage that I love that I didn't quite hear in what you were saying. But you do it in a jazz way. You say, here's what I heard. And here's another. And can we jazz our way from the one to the other? Can we find a connecting flow? And so we turn. This is what I mean about moving from the courtroom into the courtyard. We challenge, but the challenge is not the challenge of attack. The challenge is the challenge of amplification. I acknowledge the suchness of what you said. I acknowledge in what you've said what I have not yet seen, but then I challenge you with the moreness of what you might not have yet seen. And together, stereoscopically, we come to see something more than we could see before, both of us together. That's
and that moreness is both the ground and the aspiration.
Exactly.
Right. Totally. Oh, interesting. Yeah, interesting. And that starts to get into like whereas normally like in a courtroom, it's all about like it's like there's something that you're trying to like win and avoid, and it's
establish a position.
It's positional. Right, exactly.
Right. But this is processual. So one of the things I'm going to ask people, like when you ask them to set an intention for Lexio, you can say, set the intention for reverence, for transformation, and a commitment to the process rather than to any position.
Right.
And not attack. What we do is we acknowledge, we amplify, and then we anticipate.
Right.
We're anticipating getting to somewhere we couldn't get to. These are the things that this is what I'm going to bring into the presentation on Saturday. This is what I want to then get feedback on and circle it back in when when the four of us regularly keep trying to reverse engineer dialectic.
Right. Absolutely. Beautiful. And I have a client, as a matter of fact. This is a great place to complete.
That's a great place to complete. So please remember to send me this
deep reverence, my friend.
Deep. Send me the file. I'm going to upload. You upload it first on your channel.
Okay,
I'll upload it on Voices with Vervaeke. And then hopefully you'll get on the Discord server right away.
Okay, great. What should we call this one, you think?
What was coming out here was, I think what was coming out here is virtue in dialogos. In both senses, the virtue in dialogos and how virtue educes virtue, how dialogos educes virtue from us. The virtue within it and the virtue that is drawn forth from us.
Bingo. All right. Oh.
Take care, my friend. This was wonderful. Thank you.
This was awesome. I've missed you.
Yeah, me too.
Yes.
Me too. I missed you so much.
Yeah. Bye-bye.
Bye.